Have you ever tried to comfort someone and you found words and you started expressing yourself and you just wanted them to feel better and it went wrong? If you've ever done that, you realize that this whole area of mourning and comforting is an area that we in our humanness cannot attain. This is something that comes from God. God is the only one who can see deep down into our spirit and our soul and touch the things that are even hidden behind the tears, behind the hurt, behind the pain. But when God Himself comforts, there's this fruit that comes out of it, a fruit of peace. There's a fruit of being understood. There's a fruit of healing. And there's a fruit of hope. All these things are parts of God's comfort. This reminds me of the last meeting, last two times when I met with my brother Tom. Tom was born exactly 51 years ago today. He was born on April 26th, 1969. Tom was the youngest of twins. Peter is now my youngest brother because Tom passed away in 2019. But in the last two times that I met with Tom, I think I had an experience that I would put in this category of Jesus bringing comfort to those who are mourning. Tom passed away just after midnight on Friday night. So in the wee hours of Saturday morning, Tom passed away. I had come up to meet with him several times over the last few months of his life. And this was Wednesday. I'd come on Wednesday in the morning and had met with him, with my mother, and now it was evening. I was there by myself with Tom, and as was my normal way of meeting with Tom, and I'd done this many, many times, I'd come and I'd take a chair and I'd sit right by his head on one side of the bed or the other side of the bed, whichever was out of the way for the nurses or the nursing staff. But on this night, I wanted to do something different. So I took a chair and I set it towards Tom's feet, and I put some worship music on my phone. It's very soft. Put it on his bookshelf. And I sat in silence for quite a while. Now, Tom was in a place where he could hear you, and if you talked to him, he knew what you were saying, but it was difficult for him to respond. He was dying of colon cancer, and he was in a lot of pain, and he was on a high level of morphine. And I didn't want to try to do some deep dialogue with him, so I thought that if I could just bring the presence of God to the room. So that's what I attempted to do. So the worship music was on, and I worshiped a little, I prayed, I talked with Tom. And I told Tom about how God had been doing a whole new journey with me. That God had been beginning to take layers off of me where He was showing me things that I had inside of me that were unhealthy, that in the spiritual realm were cancerous, and that God had been taking me through this journey of removing these layers or these skins of my mortality and flesh for years. And so I talked to him about that. And then I remember stopping and praying and just asking God for forgiveness for the times when I may have let Tom down. When I had done things that may have hurt him, or not done things that, because I didn't do them, I might have hurt him. And I'd been there probably for an hour or so, and the presence of God came, and it was a very moving experience. And I do believe that Tom joined me in that experience. And then very quickly, all of a sudden, a sequence of bizarre things happened. Nurse rushed in. The spirit was taken away from the room, and after the nurse left, I just realized that we weren't going to go any farther that night, and so I told Tom that I loved him, and I left the room. Now, honestly, in all of this, we had done no dialogue. Tom had not said anything to me. It was my time with him, bringing and invoking the presence of God, bringing the Spirit of Jesus to the room. And I couldn't have told you what was going on in Tom's thoughts. So now, that was Wednesday night. So Thursday night now, I had to drive back to Pennsylvania, and this is in Wisconsin. So I came to meet with Tom again and say goodbye, not knowing what was ahead. And as I came into the room, Tom was propped up on the bed, and I'm moving my head because he was in a lot of pain, and he was moving himself around the bed, kind of using his head as to lead his body weight. And he moved his body around, and got himself turned around, and then I was still standing, and he looked at me, and he said, "Sit there." And he pointed to the foot of the bed. And so I brought a chair and I put it at the foot of his bed, and I asked him why he told me to do that, and it's hard to explain what it's like, but he forced his eyes open and forced himself to respond. He said, "Because I want to see you." And so I sat there, and I realized that he couldn't really dialogue, and I was talking a little bit, but he was moving around and in a lot of pain. And then he swung himself around and pushed the nurse's button. And the nurse came in, and they got to rush a bunch of nurses in there, and they pushed me out of the room. And I waited, and I waited, and I waited. It was almost an hour. And he had been in a lot of pain. They had to put a catheter in him, and when they finally said I could go back in, he was clearly sedated. So I said my goodbye to him, and I think I probably knew inside that was going to be my last experience with him. It was rather disappointing, not comforting, and I left the room. It didn't occur to me till a day and a half later, when I found out that he passed away, that even though all the times I'd ever gone to visit him, and I'd always sat next to his head, that on this day he told me where to sit, and was in the place where I'd picked the night before, that I brought the presence of God. It hit me that there was something about what happened that night that he could not forget. And I still, I know beyond a doubt that was an experience of comfort for Tom. I know his days were in a lot of pain. His last 6 months were very painful. But I believe in that night that he experienced comfort, like Jesus is promising here. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted.